Imagine waking up on Black Tuesday. The banks are permanently locked shut. Your life savings are deleted. You reach into your pocket and pull out a single crumpled $1 bill, the literal difference between your family breathing tomorrow or starving. This is not a metaphor. This is the exact, suffocating reality that millions of people faced as the Roaring '20s violently crashed into a wall of unprecedented poverty. The morning air inside the house feels different, heavy with a terrifying silence. The radio, which used to play upbeat jazz, now crackles with the grim voices of panicked broadcasters announcing the evaporation of the American dream. You are standing in your kitchen, staring at a piece of green paper, feeling the cold sweat bead on your forehead. Mathematically speaking, the experts will tell you that a single $1932 is equivalent to roughly $25 today. But that sterile calculation completely misses the psychological horror of the era. The purchasing power of that dollar was violently distorted by the total catastrophic collapse of wages. Factories were padlocked, businesses were boarded up. There was no paycheck coming at the end of the week, no safety net to catch you, and absolutely no guarantee that society itself wouldn't crumble by sunset. That crumbled bill in your trembling hand wasn't just currency anymore. It was a dwindling hourglass measuring exactly how long your family could sustain their existence. Every single cent was a matter of extreme tactical planning. You might think $1 couldn't possibly keep a family alive, but that assumption is about to be completely shattered. Desperation breeds a terrifying kind of genius. People learned to stretch the boundaries of what was physically possible with a few copper coins. Let me ask you to be brutally honest with yourself. If every ATM went offline today and your bank accounts were zeroed out, what is the absolute minimum amount of cash you could survive on right now? Most modern minds cannot even comprehend the sheer, unadulterated panic of having zero backup options. Because when we look at the exact grocery receipt from 1932, the sheer volume of food you could buy with just $1 will make you violently jealous, until you realize the horrific catch. Part 2. The Hooverville Grocery Run. You walk into the market with your single dollar, and suddenly you are royalty. Bread is 5 cents, cabbage is 3 cents, and a pound of hamburger meat is 12 cents. The math feels like an absolute miracle. For a mere 15 cents, you could supposedly feed a family of 5 for the entire day. But that is exactly where the illusion shatters. You aren't buying the food you eat today. You are buying the cheapest, most degraded calories legally allowed to be sold. The bread for 5 cents, it was often bulked out with literal sawdust or bone meal to make the expensive flour stretch further. You would chew it and it would aggressively scrape the roof of your mouth. But there's a nuance here that history books often sanitize. People didn't just eat cheap food. They invented entirely new, stomach-churning meals born out of pure, unadulterated desperation. Enter the mulligan stew. This wasn't a hearty, comforting family recipe. It was a pot of boiling water, a few scavenged scraps of withered vegetables, weeds pulled from the yard, and maybe, just maybe, a single potato stolen from a railway cart. The goal wasn't nutrition or flavor. The goal was to put something hot and heavy in your stomach to trick your brain into feeling full. And then came the desserts. Not cake, not fruit tart, water pie. A horrific, poverty-driven concoction of hot water, a few tablespoons of flour, and a dash of sugar baked in a brittle crust. It tasted like sweet glue. This changes everything about how you view a family meal. Behind every one of these servings was a devastating silent maternal sacrifice. Mothers across the country would cook these meager rations, plate them for their husbands and children, and then quietly claimed they weren't hungry today. They lived off the microscopic scrape-offs from their children's plates, slowly starving themselves so the next generation could survive the winter. Be honest with yourself. Could you survive on nothing but boiled cabbage, water pie, and lard for an entire month? Let me know below. Most of us would break in a week. You filled your belly with sawdust-laced bread, but your body needs more than just cheap calories to survive the brutal winters of the 1930s. And as you step back out into the freezing street, the real pain begins, starting at the very bottom of your feet. Part 3. The Cardboard Soul. Imagine being a former bank manager, a man who once wore tailored suits, now wincing in agony with every step because you had to stuff wet cardboard into your shoes. It is a deeply physical, soul-crushing humiliation. Just months ago, you were approving corporate loans and walking confidently on polished marble floors. Now the leather on your soles has completely worn through, exposing your bare skin to the freezing, jagged pavement of the city. A simple cobbler repair cost roughly 50 cents. That is half of your entire net worth. You simply cannot afford to fix your own shoes. So you scavenge. You find a discarded box in an alleyway, cut out the crude shape of your foot, and slide it inside your loafer. For the first 10 minutes, it actually works. But the exact moment it rains, that cardboard disintegrates into a soggy, freezing mush, sending a chilling ache all the way up your spine with every single step you take. This is the brutal, unforgiving reality of the make, do, and mend culture. Your single dollar could not buy a new suit. Those cost around $10, an astronomically impossible sum. But your dollar could buy a massive pile of cheap fabric, crude needles, and heavy thread. And this desperate necessity gave birth to one of the most brilliant corporate adaptations in American history. Out in the rural farmlands, women couldn't afford a single yard of store-bought fabric. Instead, they started tearing apart the heavy burlap and cotton sacks that held animal feed, vigorously scrubbing out the branding and sewing them into dresses for their daughters. It was rough, incredibly itchy, and an unmistakable uniform of extreme poverty. But here is the genius part. When the major feed companies realized their sacks were being used as everyday clothing, they didn't try to stop it. They completely revolutionized their packaging. They started printing bright floral patterns, plaids, and cheerful designs directly onto the chicken feed sacks. Suddenly, a 100-pound bag of flour wasn't just baking material, it was next season's wardrobe. They masked their utter poverty with flour sack flowers, fighting desperately to keep their dignity intact. But dignity won't keep the rain off your head when the landlord comes knocking, demanding money you simply do not have. Part 4. The Eviction Notice. The loudest sound in the 1930s wasn't the factory whistle. It was the heavy thud of your family's furniture being thrown onto the pavement by an unforgiving landlord. It happened with zero warning and absolute brutal efficiency. You could beg, you could plead, and you could show the landlord your single crumpled $1 bill, but the mathematics of the 1930s housing market were a cold, impenetrable wall. A cheap, incredibly basic apartment in a major city cost roughly $15 a month. Your dollar was mathematically useless for keeping a roof over your head. It couldn't even buy you a week's grace period. This changes everything about how you view that dollar. It was no longer a tool to maintain your middle-class life. It instantly transformed into emergency disaster funding. When the wooden chair hit the cobblestone street and the door locked behind you, you had two desperate choices for housing. First, you could walk into the darkest, most dangerous part of town and seek out a flop house. For 10 or 15 cents, your dollar could buy you a tiny, filthy sliver of floor space in a boarding room packed shoulder to shoulder with 40 other desperate, broken men. The smell of unwashed bodies, cheap gin, and pure despair was suffocating, but it kept the frostbite away for one more night. But there is a nuance here that completely redefines human resilience. Millions of Americans rejected the flophouse. Instead, they took their dollar straight to the hardware store. They bought a handful of rusty iron nails, a few yards of cheap canvas, and maybe some discarded scrap wood. Then they dragged these pathetic materials to the nearest public space. In New York City, the great, beautiful lawn of Central Park rapidly mutated into a dystopian nightmare. It became a sprawling, chaotic slum of trash-built huts known mockingly as a Hooverville. Families who once had mortgages were now huddling around oil drum fires, living inside shelters made of literal garbage, all funded by the meager purchasing power of that single dollar. You are homeless, hungry, and freezing. Logic says you save your last coins for food, but human nature is deeply irrational, and millions of starving people took their last dimes and spent them in the darkest, strangest room in the city. Part 5. The Cost of Sanity. While millions starved in the streets, Hollywood experienced an explosive golden age, all funded by people choosing to watch King Kong instead of buying a loaf of bread. It sounds completely insane to the modern ear. Why on earth would a father who can barely afford to feed his children cabbage water take his precious life-saving pennies and hand them to a cinema ticket booth? But this is where we severely misunderstand the psychology of deep poverty. Entertainment wasn't a luxury in 1932. It was a mandatory psychological anesthetic. Let's break down the economics of this bizarre escapism. A movie ticket during the Great Depression cost anywhere from 10 to 15 cents. Your single dollar wasn't just a ticket, it was a massive entertainment budget. It gave you 6 or 7 separate trips into a dark, sprawling, intricately decorated movie palace. It even left you enough spare change to buy a bag of hot, buttered popcorn. And the physical experience of the theater was just as vital as the movie itself. These cinemas were among the very first buildings in America to have commercial air conditioning. Stepping out of the blazing, dusty heat or the bone-chilling winter wind and into a plush velvet seat was like stepping onto another planet. For 2 glorious, uninterrupted hours, you weren't a failed bank manager with cardboard in your shoes. You weren't a mother boiling weeds for dinner. You were exploring unmapped jungles with giant apes. You were wearing a tailored tuxedo, tap-dancing flawlessly alongside Fred Astaire. You were laughing, dreaming, and temporarily pausing the relentless, crushing weight of your own terrifying reality. If you went completely broke tomorrow, what modern entertainment subscription or app would you absolutely refuse to give up? Tell me below. I guarantee you'd cling to it just like they clung to the silver screen. They gladly handed over their food money because sanity was a premium commodity, and going to the movies was the only thing keeping them from completely losing their minds. That brief Hollywood high faded the moment you walked back into the gray, dusty reality of the street. And reality hits hardest at midnight, especially when the silence of the room is broken by a sound every parent dreads. Part 6. The Lethal Cough. Your child wakes up coughing in the dead of night, and you stare at your $1 bill with pure terror because the doctor charges $2 just to walk through the door. Today, a nighttime cough is an annoyance. You grab some cherry syrup from the cabinet and go back to sleep. But in 1932, a deep, rattling cough in a freezing, unheated apartment was a potential death sentence. And this is exactly where the superpower of the dollar completely and totally failed you. Professional medicine had morphed into an elite, unreachable luxury for the working class. A standard doctor's consultation or a home visit required a minimum of $2. Your single, carefully hoarded bill fell exactly 50% short of saving your child's life. The math was absolute, and doctors, who were also struggling to keep their practices open, rarely worked for free. That is exactly why your dollar had to be diverted to the terrifying world of the Depression-era pharmacy. You couldn't buy a cure, but you could build a makeshift, desperate first aid kit. For 15 cents, you could buy a heady glass bottle of aspirin. For another 10 cents, a dark vial of iodine for cuts. You grabbed rubbing alcohol to violently cool down fevers. But there is a much darker side to this medical isolation. Driven by pure desperation and a lack of funds, millions of Americans turned to unregulated quack tonics. They spent their precious cents on vile-tasting, heavily marketed syrups that promised to cure pneumonia or tuberculosis, but were actually just toxic mixtures of high-proof alcohol, opium, and literal snake oil. People routinely died from ailments we consider entirely trivial today. A simple infected tooth or a minor cut that turned into sepsis became lethal. Why? Because going to a real hospital meant taking on a mountain of debt that could literally send a family into permanent, inescapable ruin. You applied a harsh mustard plaster to your child's chest, you prayed the fever would break, and you sat in absolute paralyzing helplessness. The dollar was a shield, but it was made of fragile paper, and severe illness pierced right through it. When the medicine failed and the local jobs dried up entirely, staying in your hometown was a guaranteed death sentence. You had to move. But with gas at 10 cents a gallon and no car to put it in, millions turned to a mode of transport that literally cut people in half. Part 7. The Hobos. Gas was a miraculously cheap 10 cents a gallon, but when you don't own a car, your only option to cross state lines is to gamble your life jumping onto a moving freight train. Modern pop culture has heavily romanticized the image of the carefree, wandering hobo carrying a bindle on a stick. But we need to aggressively de-romanticize this instantly. This was not a grand, sprawling American adventure. It was a lethal, hyper-violent necessity born out of pure economic starvation. 10 cents a gallon is a phenomenal price if you actually have a Ford Model T. But if you already sold your vehicle to pay off a hostile landlord, that cheap gas is nothing but a cruel joke. This changes everything about how you travel. You couldn't buy a passenger train ticket. Those cost dollars you simply did not possess. So you walked to the rail yards in the dead of night. Describe the sheer, terrifying mass of a moving steel beast in your mind. Jumping a freight train requires precise athletic timing in the pitch black. Miss the rusty iron ladder by an inch, and the massive steel wheels will effortlessly crush your legs into a pulp. Hundreds of desperate men died exactly this way, their bodies left unrecognized in the gravel. But they took the risk anyway. Why? Because staying in a dead factory town meant watching their families slowly wither away from malnutrition. The heartbreak here is absolutely suffocating. Imagine a father looking at his sleeping children one last time, slipping out the back door and leaving them behind because his presence is just another mouth to feed. He isn't spending his single dollar on transportation. He is taking that dollar to a grimy hardware store to outfit himself for a war against the elements. For 50 cents, he buys a heavy, coarse canvas coat. For 10 cents, a dented tin pot. For 5 cents a pound, dried beans. He takes this pathetic survival kit into the sprawling, smoky rail yard camps known as jungles. There, he boils those hard beans in his cheap tin pot, surrounded by hundreds of other broken, silent men staring blankly into the fire, miles away from everything they love. The physical toll of the road was brutal, but the mental destruction of feeling like a total failure was even worse. To cope with that crushing feeling of emasculation, men began to spend their precious cents on a very specific kind of poison. Part 8. The Price of Numbness. Prohibition was ending in 1933, and a man feeling completely stripped of his dignity would easily trade his last 15 cents for a pack of Lucky Strikes just to feel normal for 5 minutes. It is the ultimate paradox of a famine. Why on earth would someone buy cigarettes when they desperately need bread? Because human beings are not biological robots driven strictly by caloric logic. When you have spent 12 agonizing hours standing outside in a freezing, humiliating breadline, only to reach the front and be told the soup is gone, your brain screams for a dopamine hit. You crave a distraction. You crave a momentary, fleeting illusion of control over your own destroyed life. The economics of self-medication during the Great Depression are absolutely staggering. A pack of unfiltered cigarettes cost roughly 15 cents. A cheap, highly questionable pint of bootleg bathtub gin could be quietly purchased for 50 cents in the grimy back alleys of major cities. Your single, heavily guarded dollar bill could buy a significant amount of temporary numbness. This completely redefines how we view vice and luxury during an economic collapse. It wasn't a reckless party, it was a desperate psychological coping mechanism. Fathers who felt profoundly emasculated by their inability to provide for their crying children would sit alone on splintered park benches. They would strike a match with trembling, calloused hands and inhale the harsh tobacco smoke deep into their lungs. For those 3 uninterrupted minutes, the sharp hunger pangs finally dulled. The suffocating anxiety quieted down. The unbearable shame of being unemployed in a ruthless society that valued men solely by their financial output simply faded away into the gray smoke. They were literally prioritizing their psychological survival over their physical sustenance. You might judge them from the comfort of the modern era, but put yourself in their worn-out cardboard stuffed shoes. When the future is nothing but a terrifying black void of poverty, you stop planning for next year and start paying for the next 5 minutes of peace. But you can only drink and smoke away the pain for so long before the money completely evaporates. And when the tobacco runs out, the alcohol dries up, and the very last penny is gone, a family is forced into the most horrifying transaction in American history. Part 9. The impossible choice. You've probably seen the haunting photograph of a mother hiding her face in shame, standing behind a wooden sign in her front yard that reads, "Sale." It is the single most visceral, devastating image of the entire era. To a modern viewer, it feels fundamentally impossible to comprehend. But to truly understand it, we must immediately strip away our comfortable modern judgment and stare directly into the terrifying abyss of an absolute, uncompromising systemic collapse. This was not a callous mother who didn't love her children. This was a human being whose soul had been systematically crushed into powder by an economy that had completely abandoned her. What actually happens when the $1 is gone? Not just your dollar, but the neighbor's dollar and the local charity's dollar. The soup kitchens ran completely dry. The local churches ran out of alms to give. The municipal government was totally bankrupt. There was absolutely no social safety net waiting to catch you. No food stamps, no government unemployment checks. There was nothing but the cold, unforgiving pavement of the street. When a family finally reached this horrifying breaking point, they had already exhausted every other option. They had sold the living room furniture, they had pawned their heavy winter coats, they had traded their wedding rings for a sack of flour. There was literally nothing left to liquidate but human life. Placing that crude wooden sign in the dry grass was an act of pure, unfathomable agony. It was the ultimate nightmarish sacrifice, trading the physical presence of your own flesh and blood for the microscopic, desperate hope that a wealthier family might buy them, take them in, and actually feed them. It shatters the romanticized illusion of the American dream into a million jagged pieces. You are watching a desperate society cannibalize its own future just to survive the afternoon. The psychological damage of having a literal price tag placed on your existence is completely immeasurable. Those who survived this era didn't just move on when the economy recovered, they carried the infection of extreme poverty in their minds forever. Which is why, decades later, when these survivors passed away, their children found something deeply disturbing hidden inside their bedroom walls. Part 10. The Mattress Bank. Decades after the Great Depression ended, children cleaning out their deceased grandparents' homes were stunned to find hundreds of dollar bills stuffed tightly inside mattresses and taped behind mirrors. This wasn't just eccentric, old-age behavior, it was a profound, untreated, and deeply ingrained psychological scar. The people who lived through the absolute hell of 1932 never, ever recovered from the trauma. Even when the economy roared back to life, even when the ambitious New Deal rebuilt the nation's infrastructure, and even when the massive industrial machine of World War II completely eradicated the unemployment crisis, the ghost of the Great Depression haunted them until their dying breath. They looked at a $1 bill with a level of reverence and sheer terror that we can barely imagine today. They fundamentally understood a dark reality. They knew that banks were not impenetrable magical fortresses. They were fragile institutions built entirely on a foundation of collective hallucination. They had stood on the sidewalks in 1929 and watched those very institutions lock their heavy brass doors, vaporizing their life savings in the blink of an eye. Consequently, they trusted absolutely nothing but the physical, crinkling paper held tightly in their own hands. They obsessively hoarded tin foil. They washed and reused cheap plastic bags until they fell apart. And they hid thick stacks of cash in coffee cans buried deep in the backyard, sewn inside the hems of old winter coats and wedged beneath the floorboards of their suburban homes. They lived in a state of permanent, exhausting financial hypervigilance, forever waiting for the other shoe to drop. This is the ultimate echoing legacy of the single powerful 1932 dollar. It wasn't just a medium of exchange to buy cheap cabbage or theater tickets. It was a physical manifestation of survival. The trauma was passed down through the generations, silently whispering that everything you own, everything you love, and everything you have built can be ruthlessly taken away from you before the sun sets. They knew a truth that we have comfortably forgotten. Money is an illusion built on trust, and trust can vanish in a single afternoon. So, the next time you tap your phone to buy a coffee, ask yourself, if the numbers on the screen disappeared tomorrow, how long would you last on the cash in your pocket?